Hey everyone, friends! Congrats to all of you who are already on your New Year holidays or who took a festive vacation. And today, just for you, I've put together the top 15 best new releases that came out recently, so you can spend this time with real vibes. Anyway, without any extra talk, let's get started. Keeper. For fans of indie masterpieces with an awesome visual style, but which still somehow stay off the radar for a wide circle of gamers, something pretty worthy also dropped last month. It's a super atmospheric indie project that tells the story of a living lighthouse that magically grows legs and heads out on a journey toward a lonely mountain. As expected from games like this, the entire story unfolds without a single word, mostly through the environment, the visual design, and different metaphors, which, by the way, isn't exactly new for this genre. Also, the lighthouse won't be traveling alone. A sentient bird will help you search for different items or solve the next puzzle you'll run into along the way. But the main character also has a few tricks of his own. Since he's a lighthouse, his light affects the environment and scares off a sinister entity that wants to spread across the whole world. And you know what's really upsetting? The studio behind this already released other great indie hits like the first two Psychonauts games, but since the publisher here, as far as I understand, is Xbox or Microsoft, nobody really bothered with proper marketing. So even though the reviews on Steam are positive, there are barely around 300 of them, which is extremely little for such soulful games. If you, just like me, love small indie titles, then I highly recommend checking it out. Not only for the story, but also for the stunning, colorful visuals and the unique characters. I don't know if any of you remember this or not, but back in 2018, there was an amazing roguelike called Moonlighter, a pixel art, top-down game. And now, 8 years later, it finally got a sequel. Here, just like in the first game, the main character balances between two roles. During the day, he runs his little shop, arranging the shelves, setting prices, and dealing with picky customers. Basically, it's a full-on shopkeeper simulator. And at night, we head out looking for adventure and valuable loot in all sorts of dungeons, hunting for the next treasure while risking losing absolutely everything on every single run. Plus, between trading and these little expeditions, you can stroll around the village, talk to the locals, and buy decorations and gear from them. So in reality, this is both an action RPG and a shopkeeping sim mixed into one. For now, the game is only out in early access, and at the moment there are 3 main biomes available to explore. There are tons of relics, an improved combat system compared to the first part, 4 weapon types, and nearly 100 perks to upgrade, both in the dungeons and in your shop. Oh, and yeah, almost forgot. Your village also needs leveling up, because by investing your profits into your neighbors' establishments, you can unlock new gear, bonuses, and attract new residents. If you love those super addictive indie games, this one is definitely not something you should skip. And here's another new release, but this time a full-on AAA title that's closely tied to Xbox. It's the second part of The Outer Worlds, which came out at the end of this year. I don't think I need to explain the obvious. It's a pretty big open-world action RPG from Obsidian. By the way, it's already their second one this year. The first was Avowed, if I'm not mistaken, early in the year. So let's say a few words about the game itself. The events of the second part will now unfold in a brand new location where a conflict is heating up between local factions, each one chasing its own goals. And we, as always, take on the role of the player who's supposed to figure out what's going on and bring some sort of order to the situation. Unlike the first game, the sequel puts a much bigger emphasis on deep build variety. The skill system has been completely reworked. Instead of grouped skills, each attribute is now upgraded independently, and more than 90 unique perks reward unusual approaches, like a build that focuses on bonus damage for kills. The world itself has become larger and more detailed, where it's recommended to carefully explore every location to find something useful, stumble into a new little quest, or simply unlock fresh dialogue options. It's an RPG after all. Visually, by the way, according to reviews, it turned out better than the first one, but personally, I didn't notice any huge difference. Now, maybe that's just a matter of taste. Anyway, if you enjoy big open-world games with tons of quests, activities, and progression systems, this one is definitely a pretty solid pick. An indie project that came out not too long ago, but is definitely worth your attention, especially if you love those top-tier survival horrors. Funny enough, Total Chaos is actually a mod that originally released for Doom 2, which is why the very first comparison that automatically comes to mind is probably Cry of Fear. Both games started as mods but eventually turned into standalone titles, and incredibly atmospheric ones at that. Story-wise, you play as a Coast Guard officer whose ship gets destroyed during a storm, leaving the poor guy stranded on a strange and insanely creepy island. The very place you'll have to push through from that moment on. The game isn't very long and consists of around 9 chapters, where you'll have to explore different labyrinths, apartments, and other abandoned locations, collect loot to craft weapons, and of course, fight monsters. In that regard, the game is almost shamelessly impressive, since special attention was given to melee combat, and for an indie project, it's executed surprisingly well. Visually, it even looks like straight-up photorealism. And what really sells the whole thing is the overwhelming atmosphere of total loneliness and fear, combined with a soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka. Yes, that very composer who created the music for the original Silent Hill games. So yeah, if you're into survival horror, this is absolutely not something you should skip. If you've been missing those unique games with interesting stories and ideas, then just so you know, Dispatch came out in October. An awesome mix of a strategy game and, unexpectedly, an interactive movie all in one, made by former Telltale Games developers where the main premise is built around a comedic roast of superheroes. Basically, at the center of the story, we've got a superhero named Robert Robertson, also known as Mecha Man. Long story short, he loses his power suit in a fight, and now, instead of saving the world, he's forced to look for, let's say, a simpler job. And that job turns out to be a dispatcher, someone who sends employees to emergency calls when someone in the city urgently needs help. And things get even worse because your subordinates are far from being model superheroes. They're a bunch of former villains who are being rehabilitated through this line of work. As for the gameplay, it's all about strategic management on a global map of Los Angeles. You need to quickly analyze incoming situations, assess risks, and assign the most suitable agents to each mission. And keep in mind, every employee is different. Each has strengths and weaknesses that affect teamwork and mission efficiency. By the way, the voice cast deserves special mention. For example, one of the characters is voiced by Aaron Paul. Yes, the same Jesse from Breaking Bad, which for me is an absolutely amazing bonus. It's a shame only a few episodes have been released so far and the rest will come later, but personally, I'm insanely excited for them. For racing fans, this year wasn't exactly a gift, but we still got not one but 2 new Assetto Corsa entries. First came Evo, and now at the very end of the year, Rally. As the name suggests, well, yeah, the main theme here is the Rally Championship. Basically, it's the same good old racing simulator, where everything follows the classic formula for this genre. Great graphics, realistic physics, believable car handling and on-road behavior, licensed cars and tracks, plus day-night cycles and various weather conditions. In short, the full package, the basic minimum you'd expect. It's a shame, though, that the number of cars at launch is also basically the minimum, around 10 vehicles of different classes. You've got cars from the 70s and some modern Citroëns, each of them surprisingly well detailed. There aren't many race modes either. There's free ride, rally weekend, single rally, and time trial with online rankings. But I don't think I need to explain that for simulators like this. It's pretty much recommended to have proper equipment. Either a good gamepad or ideally a wheel for full immersion. Content-wise, yeah, it's a bit lacking for now, but they promise to expand it with the full release. The car count will jump from 10 to more than 30, they'll add new modes, and also full VR support. As for when the game will leave early access, sadly, that's still unknown. Fresh indie from Russian solo developer Sergei Noskov. If you've played his earlier games, you more or less know what's waiting for you here. Imagine cyberpunk and post-apocalypse, only not in the States like it usually is, but in a post-Soviet era, where we're controlling a guy named Ignat, who's fighting to survive in a world where the old civilization is nothing but a name. So we find an old, but most importantly, working Neva, if I'm not mistaken, and head out on a real journey, exploring a ton of different locations. Gameplay-wise, at first it feels like it's basically a first-person walking sim, but it's also a shooter because you'll not only be exploring places in search of something useful, but also shooting back at the robots roaming the world, and sometimes solving all kinds of puzzles that will definitely make you think. The atmosphere here is just chef's kiss. The whole post-Soviet apocalypse vibe is done a solid 10 out of 10. Not only thanks to the visuals, but also the story and most importantly, the music. In my opinion, it's a real indie gem that many might have skipped, and very much shouldn't have. If you're tired of the pricey, samey AAA segment, games like this are exactly what the doctor ordered. In October, a brand new Little Nightmares installment also came out. But as they say, there's one little nuance. The game was developed by completely different people, not the ones who made the first and second parts, but the team who once gave the world Until Dawn. Because of that, the third game, while not bad, is definitely weaker than the previous entries. Though the core concept stayed the same, you're still being told the story of two small children trapped in a creepy, unsettling world they need to escape from. You can do this either alone or as a duo, but sadly, only online. In one of my videos, I said you could do it on the same screen. So yeah, my apologies, that was not true. My mistake. The gameplay formula is the same. We move from one point to another, solve all kinds of puzzles with a strong focus on co-op mechanics, sometimes fighting or, on the contrary, running away from various terrifying monsters. By the way, their design is genuinely pretty good. Same goes for the locations. Dark and atmospheric, but in their own way beautifully eerie. There's a certain vibe to Little Nightmares, something that kind of reminds you of, maybe Tim Burton's work. Whether you want to check it out or not, that's up to you. Like I said above, it's weaker than the first and second parts, which might push away longtime fans. But if you haven't played the series and just want a dark co-op fairy tale with a story you can beat in a couple of evenings, then why not? Surely every one of you has imagined how cool it would be to buy your own little house on wheels and head out on a trip with your friends. Well, you can bring all of that to life in the brand new game you're seeing on screen. A game where you and your friends are heading home after a great vacation. But you end up taking a slightly different route, one filled with all sorts of chaotic situations you'll have to figure your way out of. You'll be constantly dealing with the laws of physics, using a winch to pull yourself up a mountain, or get out of some pit or cliffside mess, all while stuffing yourselves with burgers, chugging cola, and yelling at your teammates to keep everyone coordinated. And of course, you'll need to assign roles. One becomes the disaster driver, another grills patties, the third repairs the car, and the fourth is just messing around and entertaining everyone. Honestly, I don't even know what could be better than gathering a bunch of friends, driving an old heap of junk, and just cussing each other out the whole way. Right now, the game is still in early access, but it already has around 2,500 positive reviews from players and a not-too-bad peak online count on Steam. So if you've got people to play with, I highly recommend spending your next weekend right here. There's also a completely free, and honestly very solid, game set in ancient China called Where Winds Meet. If I had to describe it briefly but clearly, it's basically an open-world action RPG. I talked about it literally in the previous video, but for those who missed it, I think it won't hurt if I repeat myself. The premise is simple. You pick your hero's gender and head into an open world with full freedom, where you can explore all kinds of beautiful corners of ancient China, fight enemies, level up, do quests, or even join one of the warring factions. Meaning you can become a mercenary, a bandit, or even a monk. Totally up to you. You can explore the world solo, or if you feel like it, in co-op with friends, or even fight against other players. The combat, by the way, is an absolute treat. There's genuinely nothing to complain about there. It's colorful, flashy, dynamic, though the damage against enemies is a bit low, but maybe that's just early on. Long story short, if you love Asian aesthetics, stylish fights, and an open world, and on top of that one you don't even have to pay for, then this is definitely not a bad option at all. Arc Raiders. Guys, in this review, I want to talk not so much about the mechanics, co-op, or gameplay, but about the overall feeling this game gives you. First of all, I just want to confess my love to everyone at Embark who is responsible for the art design, the lore, and honestly, the whole atmosphere of this game. Arc Raiders looks like a world that could only be imagined if Cymac, Lem, and Bradbury suddenly decided to co-write a retro-futuristic novel about Earth after a mechanical invasion. It's not space, not cyberpunk. It's a quiet, dusty, deeply tangible post-futurism, the atmosphere of an old future. The game is full of everyday life set against the backdrop of a grand tomorrow. Household gadgets, a half-ruined techno world, people living among the remains of a once great civilization, abandoned factories, stations, dams, spaceports, and scorched cities. You genuinely want to explore all of it. You believe in this world, and you want to stay in it. As for the arcs themselves, they create this feeling of humanity clashing with something intelligent, yet completely beyond understanding. Massive spider-like machines, patrolling drones, scouting probes descending from Earth's occupied orbit. All of them are cold and emotionless. You know, there's no sense that humans will defeat space. They're just surviving among alien machines that fell to Earth without explanation, without a message, without dialogue. I especially want to highlight the soundtrack and the sound design. Everything sounds incredible. Every noise, effect, explosion, even the ambient background during raids creates a truly immersive experience. And if you've got good headphones, you're going to get, guys, a genuine ecstasy. After spending a few dozen hours in the game, I realized I log into Arc Raiders not for tense gameplay, unpredictable encounters with other raiders, progression, or quests. No. I do it mostly for the aesthetic pleasure. It's a real audio-visual feast for the eyes and ears. Finally, it's not another tasteless clone or a faceless space opera, but something truly fresh, new, captivating, and mesmerizing. Overall, you can say the same about another interesting horror game that came out just recently, but already grabbed a whole bunch of positive reviews on Steam. This one will especially hit the spot for those of you who, love that dark sci-fi vibe. Games in the spirit of Alien Isolation or Dead Space. Short version. Story-wise, you play as a nameless astronaut on an abandoned lunar base. And the whole place absolutely radiates 80s retrofuturism. You've got flickering lights, dim corridors, old monitors, and the overall base design partly resembles the ship from the first Alien. So yeah, it's pretty clear the developers drew a lion's share of their inspiration from Ridley Scott's legacy. Your goal is perfectly straightforward. Figure out what actually happened on the deserted station and find out where the entire crew went, exploring different areas, hiding from monsters, and solving puzzles along the way. Gameplay-wise, it's the classic horror walking sim formula. The protagonist has no weapons, so your only option is to act quietly and unseen. Visually, the game looks solid too. Unreal Engine 5 fits the project surprisingly well, and the overall atmosphere turned out properly eerie, even more on the anxious side than outright scary. If you're into sci-fi horror, this is one of the few projects this year you definitely shouldn't overlook. Also among the interesting and atmospheric story-driven horror games this year, the second part of Tormented Souls came out. If you're not familiar, the first game was, let's say, a solid clone of Resident Evil and the early Silent Hill titles, which many people loved, because, well, you don't always need to reinvent the wheel from scratch. And the second one is basically a spiritual continuation of all that. Essentially a survival horror with a fixed camera, where supplies are always scarce, puzzles are tough, and the atmosphere is heavy as hell. Story-wise, this entry continues the original. We once again play as Caroline, who travels to a small town in the south of Chile to visit a mysterious clinic in hopes of helping her sister. And as you can probably guess, that clinic is a real nightmare pit. The gameplay formula is simple but effective and unexpectedly tied to switching between different dimensions. Actions in the other world affect the past of the real universe, which lets you influence what happens around you. Basically, something similar to what you had in The Medium if you played it. As for combat, you'll be fighting enemies using improvised weapons. A chainsaw or a nail gun, for example, become your main allies on this not-so-easy journey. And for, so to speak, modern gamers, the game supports flexible difficulty settings, from the old-school mode with limited saves and tank-style controls like in the classic Resident Evil games, all the way down to an easier mode for less experienced players. A worthy sequel in the old Europa Universalis series came out, the fifth installment, and miracle of miracles, it also turned out to be a solid and genuinely interesting game. If you're not familiar with this series, it's basically a kind of global grand strategy where you're given control of one of many very different states, The time frame? For the fifth game, it's a full 500 years, from the late Middle Ages to the middle of the 19th century. How you run your country and what you manage to turn it into over those 500 years, that's entirely up to you. So, just like in previous entries, the fifth game gives you room for diplomacy, economic management, warfare, and shaping society. Plus, special attention is given to the system of estates and social groups. Each region is inhabited by commoners, clergy, nobles, and burghers, and the balance between them determines the country's stability and political power. Their needs and professions directly affect the economy and, naturally, the social life of the nation. In short, the core gameplay stays the same, just with new mechanics and an even bigger focus on realism. To me, it's a true sandbox with very few analogs. A place where anyone can build a world-spanning empire from any country they choose and try to bring their most twisted historical fantasies to life. Like, for example, colonizing the American continent while playing as China, or preventing the collapse of the Golden Horde. The number of possibilities is just massive. SpongeBob Titans of the Tide. Well, I suggest we step away from games where you actually have to think and move on to something where you don't need to think at all. For example, another SpongeBob game. I'll be honest, as a kid I absolutely loved the cartoon, but I watched maybe 9 seasons at most and then stopped. The newer ones I tried checking out, but they're just not the same at all. The game itself isn't really that different from the previous SpongeBob titles that came out not so long ago. Story-wise, SpongeBob and his friend Patrick once again managed to find adventures on their own fifth point. Long story short, the plot revolves around King Neptune fighting the Flying Dutchman, and because of this, Bikini Bottom slowly turns from a cozy little town into a ghost city. And of course, we need to stop that. You control both characters, switching between them on the fly with a single button. And yes, each one has their own abilities. SpongeBob jumps far and agilely, while Patrick can dig and grab objects. Together, they explore familiar locations from the show, from Neptune's Palace to Bikini Mountain and Jellyfish Fields. The game, just like other SpongeBob projects, is packed with the franchise's trademark humor and all sorts of goofy moments. The only upsetting part is the lack of co-op, because it would have fit this game perfectly, especially considering the 2020 release did have it.